All right, so for this one, again, I'll have the link, but this is a grid walkthrough with Semantics. So we know that we have to build a page using headers and main and sections, and footers. Let's look at then, and I kind of have this built so that you could kind of work through figuring this out and using semantic elements while we're still building grid. Okay, so let's look at this page, and we need to kind of think. Now, body is the visual element that holds everything visual that you are seeing on the page. So I need to kind of start identifying stuff from like an eagle eye view and working my way down to see maybe how I want to actually plan spacing with everything. Okay, so I would say that the easiest way to look at this is we can start at the top. This would probably be the header. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, this is probably the footer. I'm sure you guys can all agree on that. Everything that's in the middle is, looks like it's different parts, but it looks like it's all part of the main. So the main is our main content on our page. So really we should have 3 elements. So then if I'm looking at my HTML, an easy way to decide is that you need to make sure that your parent container is only having direct children for those elements. So in here, if I minimize all of my direct children, all I should see left over is only those ones that are affected: header, main, and footer. Okay, so then that would mean that body would be my parent container. That is going to dictate the layout for header, main, and footer. So then let's look at our CSS. I have some simple design. I got some colors so that we can start seeing some layout. But the first thing that we're going to do is we have to set our width and height, because we know that we're going to start actually doing our spacing and everything. So let's do width. And we're going to use it in terms of VW, virtual width, and VH, virtual height. We want to take 100 virtual width for our body. And then let's go ahead and count our page. So I'm going to use scrolls for displaying a full page for what my virtual height would be. So if I'm looking at this, down to this image right here, that's 1, 2, so we're looking about 250, 275. So we can use that to kind of build. So let's look then at our page. We're going to say height 275 virtual height. Okay. Now your page may be a little bit different, but depending on what you're looking at, that's what you're kind of looking at for determining the height. I'm going to start with the grid. So I'm going to say display grid. And then I'm going to have to, so now I'm seeing this based off what's default. This is my header that looks like that's taking up a lot of space. My main doesn't look like it's taking up enough, and my footer looks like it's taking up a lot of space. So let's kind of look on our page, approximately how much of this screen is it taking. I would say maybe about 30 virtual height. I'm going to skip the main for now, and then I would say maybe about 20. And then all the rest, I just want it to all go into that main. So let's create grid template columns. And we're going to do, let's say, 30 VH, 1 FR, and 20 VH. We should now have that's not columns, that's going to be rows. If I'm really looking at the header, is that going all the way across? Yes, it is. The main, is the main going all the way across? Yes, it is. Is the footer going all the way across? So really, I could look at, now again, you could probably design this a little bit different. I'm just going to say that I have a 1-column grid, and then I'm doing my grid template rows to designate my spacing. Grid template rows. 30 VH, 1 FR, and 20 VH. So let's look at our scrolling for it to see if that looks kind of like it. Okay, so there's my header. Here's all my main. That's the purple. And then I have my gray. That looks pretty close. There's my header. There's my main. There's my footer. Okay, so now we are looking, because you can, with grids, you can do farther inside. Now there are some areas of this page that I'm not going to do because we can go ahead and just do it with Flexbox, and I'm just really covering grid right now. So let's look just at the main and try to determine what we're looking at there, if we could use grid to help with our spacing. So this right here, this services, then I have travaux, apropos, and connection. So that looks like that's 4 different pieces of my main. Main can be broken up semantically using sections or articles. So these should probably be sections. So here in our HTML, if I open up my main now, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. So I have a design like that. Okay, now we know that we're going to have to be targeting the main, and we're going to have to designate the width and height again. Since the width is designated by, since it's the child of a parent container that did grid, then I could just go ahead and say 100%. Whatever that percentage was, I could go ahead and design with that. I could also do that for height too, 100%. And then I can start designing. So display grid. Now let's look at what we got. We got 4 colors now for each sections. They're all taking up the same amount of space, but let's look kind of how we need to space that out. So this, maybe 40 VH. And then we have this page. Let's say this is taking up maybe 45. This looks like it's taking up maybe about 30. So let's go ahead and play around with that. And then we can look at how far across. We're just looking at the sections themselves. The section, it looks like I only have one section, and it's going across. So I am going to use a 1-column row and then use that as my sizing. So let's go back in here. Grid template columns. (1FR). Grid template rows. Our first one we said was, 40. 40 VH, 1FR, because that's that main, it's taking up most of the space. Then we had that connection, and we said 45 VH, and then 30 VH. Okay, let's see where we're looking at. Actually giving numbers that are bigger than what it is. Let's bump this down. Let's do 30 VH. Let's do 20 VH. Let's do maybe, I don't know, 25 VH. And let's make sure we're spelling everything right. Width, height, display, grid. And I am missing a semicolon. Okay. So now we're looking at green, blue, orange, and red. We want to see if the spacing is right. Well, that looks like it's a little bit small, so I'm going to play around with it. Let's go ahead and bump that back to 40. That looks a little bit better. Let's look down at our connections. That looks too small. Let's see what that looks like at 45. That looks better. And then let's see 30. Okay, that looks better. And then I have my scrollable area for this second section. That looks pretty close. Now, there's something else that I notice. I see that all of the sections are lined up. There's almost like an imaginary line that's drawing down here from the very top of this one, and I can follow it all the way down. So this kind of indicates to me that there is probably a margin put on this. Now, I could look at, well, what if I designated the width here and I maybe made 3 columns and this was 1 FR, 1 FR, and it was empty. Yes, that is a way that I could do it. I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'm going to do margin auto to center these based off that size. So let's say that this looks like it's, let's say, this is probably, let's say, maybe about 70, and then this and this are the leftovers, so we're looking at maybe 15 and 15. Again, we're just kind of estimating based off of virtual width. So instead of doing 100%, let's see, what if we bumped it down to 70% and we gave it a margin of auto? It looks a little bit better. And so let's compare. If I had this fully sized, we might see more. I don't think that's too bad though for doing the look. Let's see. Can I open Live View in a new window? It's not going to do it that way because I didn't save it, which is fine. Okay, so we'll just leave it like this, but we're probably pretty close. Okay, so continuing on. I'm not going to design this one. This is Flexbox. This doesn't really need anything. This looks like Flexbox because I'm only really stretching in one direction. This looks like a very good example of grid. So that's my section 2. And I have already, in the code, if we're looking at the section 2, I already have started designated stuff. So if we look, I can see that I have a grid of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. And if I start counting from the bottom, I have rows. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this is really 7. This looks like this is a heading and a paragraph, probably surrounded by a div container, and that div container is just spanning the entire width of all of the columns. So I have 7 rows, 5 columns. Let's go ahead and build that. We're going to go down to our section 2. And again, I'm going to designate now, because I already put that margin in on the parent container, my width is going to be 100% of what was already designated. My height is going to be 100%. Display grid template columns. And I'm going to use the repeat function. So if you type repeat, you can say how many times you want it to repeat and the size. So I'm just giving equal sizing to all of those columns. And grid template rows. I'm going to use the repeat again. And I'm going to say 7 rows of 1 FR apiece. Okay. So now in order to see that, I have all of these images that I made, and I got one div tag that's holding an H2 and a paragraph to simulate that. I have it all commented out. If you went ahead and uncommented, you're going to start having all those images. If some of them are grayed out, that's fine. If you did correctly uncomment, it will display the issue that you may have. You just go ahead and save and refresh. Now, we have a lot of images in here, but it's throwing our columns all out of whack because those images are not being told to stay within the containers. Okay, so really what we want to say is we want to say all images that are subordinate to that section 2, I want to have a width of 100%. I want them to stay within their container. Okay, so now we have something that's kind of looking like it. There are a couple things that we need to do. This title and paragraph that's not going across all columns. And so that we have one left over here. Let's look at our image. That's not going all the way across. So then it's starting and we have one finishing here. We have 2. So our lines are off a little bit. I also see that there looks like there is spacing here between each of these columns and between each of the rows. It looks like there's spacing. It looks like it's equal spacing. So we need to address this and we need to address this spacing. The code for that, again, I'm going to have to do this from the parent container, is I'm going to say grid gap, and then I can designate. So if I said something like, let's say 10 pixels, that looks pretty close, maybe 15 pixels. That looks better. That looks kind of like what we were looking at. Now his images are a little bit more square than mine, but it looks like the spacing's pretty close. This is not spanning all of them. So we actually need to target this directly, and we need to say where we want to start, where we want to stop if we need to, which makes it convenient. But in terms of this, there's a lot of elements, and I don't want to have to actually say grid area for each one of these. As since they all need to be unique, that's going to take up a lot of time. So really, I'm just going to target this one directly and say how much space this needs to take, and then let grid designate where these are going to go. Now they're going to fill in, unless I tell it differently, they're going to fill in from how they appear in HTML, starting from left to right, top to down. Okay, so this div, which is holding, so let's look at it. This div, which is holding, and again, it's not really commented out, it's just didn't really populate. That's why we still see it. If I save, but I'm using it as a template, if I save and refresh, that would not be like this. So I have my title, my paragraph, just like what he does, title and paragraph. I could go ahead and let's target that. So one of the ways that we could do it, instead of using grid area, I could just say grid column start, and then I can say I want it to start in which column, looking at all of my columns and where I wanted to start and stop in my rows. But in this case, really all I need to do is I just need to say that I want this to span all of my columns. So I'm going to say span 5. Now it's actually going across, and then all my images, they're repopulated, and this looks a lot more like what we're talking about. This is looking a lot more like this. Now, after I get my stuff, maybe I could adjust some margins and padding on these things, and I can get it to further look like it, and throw the text in there. Once you get a layout, after you play around using the colors to help with your layout, then you can take the colors off, color them how you need to, and you have your website designed. We've just done a mock-up in about 18 minutes of what this website looks like if we wanted to play around designing it with the grid. Now, this website is responsive up to a point. So as I'm sizing, everything's going to size with it. However, I should probably design some breakpoints, because as I get too small, if we're looking at, say, cell phone size, those pictures are way too small. I need to change maybe my flow and my layout. But this is responsive to everything that I gave it based off of the screen size. Okay, so I'll have this, the blank walkthrough attached to YouTube. Use this to help get a better understanding of grid. There's a lot more resources out there for learning grid that you can use to improve how you are doing layouts and have them be more responsive. Good luck. and have fun.